Part 1. The Spark of Contempt. The courtroom was a familiar stage for Officer James Harrow on March 14, 2025. Its worn wooden benches and flickering lights as much a part of his world as the badge pinned to his chest. At 38, Harrow was a fixture in the city's police force, a man who'd spent 16 years bending the law to his will. Especially when it came to the people he deemed beneath him. Black and brown faces in the precinct's holding cells were just numbers to him. Targets for his disdain, and he'd long stopped seeing them as anything more. His uniform was crisp, his posture cocky, and his reputation as a tough cop kept complaints buried under layers of bureaucratic indifference. Today's case was routine. A young black man, barely 20, accused of loitering with intent, a charge Harrow had slapped on after a late-night patrol. He'd roughed the kid up for talking back, smirking as he wrote the report, knowing no one would question his word. Now, standing near the witness stand, he prepared to recite his polished story to the judge, his voice already rehearsed in his head. That's when he noticed her. She sat in the back row, a black woman in a navy blazer, her posture too straight, her eyes too steady. Harrow's lip twitched into a sneer. Probably the kid's sister or girlfriend, he thought, here to cry and waste everyone's time. He didn't like civilians who looked too comfortable in his domain. It unsettled him. Like a stray dog wandering into a lion's den. She wasn't fidgeting, wasn't clutching a tissue like the others. She just watched him, her gaze piercing through the room's haze. State your name for the record, the judge said, adjusting his glasses. Officer James Harrow, badge number 4729. He replied, his tone dripping with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been crossed. He launched into his testimony, painting the defendant as a threat, a punk who'd lunged at him during the stop. It was a lie, but one he'd told so often it felt like truth. As he spoke, his eyes flicked back to the woman. She hadn't moved, her stare unwavering. It grated on him, her quiet confidence, her refusal to look away. Who did she think she was? During a recess, as the courtroom thinned out, Harrow sauntered over, his boots thudding with purpose. He loomed over her, hands on his hips, his shadow swallowing her seated form. Hey, lady, he barked, his voice loud enough to draw eyes. You got a problem? Keep staring like that, and I'll give you something to look at. She didn't flinch, her lips stayed closed, her expression blank but unyielding. Harrow's irritation flared into something sharper. He hated defiance, especially from people like her, people he'd trained himself to see as powerless. What's the matter, you deaf? He sneered, leaning closer. This ain't your place. Go wait outside with the rest of the sob stories. A few onlookers shifted uncomfortably. The judge, still at the bench, paused his paperwork, glancing up. Harrow didn't care, he relished the audience. Get up, he snapped, reaching for her arm to yank her to her feet. I said move. Her voice cut through his bluster. Low and steady. Take your hand off me. Harrow froze mid-motion, his fingers brushing her sleeve. The command in her tone threw him. A flicker of unease he quickly smothered with a laugh. Or what, huh? He scoffed, tightening his grip and giving her a shove. You gonna cry to the judge? Go ahead, sweetheart. See if he cares. The room stilled. A collective breath held. Then she moved, not back, but forward, rising smoothly as her hand slipped into her blazer. Harrow's instincts kicked in, his free hand hovering near his holster. He'd drawn on less provocation before, and he half expected a fight. Instead, she pulled out a badge, gold and gleaming, holding it up like a guillotine blade. I am Olivia Grant, she said, her words slicing the air. Chief of Police, effective this morning. And you, Officer Harrow, just assaulted your superior. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Gasps turned to murmurs, then a roar of disbelief as people craned to see. Harrow's hand dropped from her arm like it burned, his smirk evaporating, his face flushed red, then drained to a sickly white, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Chief of Police? Her? His mind reeled, rejecting the idea. This wasn't possible. She was just some woman, some nobody he could push around. Yet the badge was real. Her authority undeniable. The judge banged his gavel, shouting for order, but Harrow barely heard it. His pulse hammered, a mix of shock and fury churning in his gut. "Your Honor," Olivia said, turning away from him as if he were beneath notice. "I request a private meeting about Officer Harrow's behavior, here and beyond. It's pertinent to this case." The judge blinked, then nodded. "Granted, Chief Grant." 15-minute recess. As the room cleared, Harrow stood rooted, his fists clenched. She'd blindsided him, turned his game upside down in front of everyone. The woman he'd mocked, shoved, dismissed, she was his boss? Rage boiled over the shock. Drowning it, he wouldn't let her win this. She might have the title, but he had the streets, the connections, the grit. Stomping out to the hallway, he muttered to himself, "You'll see, lady, I don't bow to anyone." But beneath the bravado, a tiny splinter of doubt lodged in his chest. For the first time in years, James Harrow felt the ground shift, and he didn't like it one bit. Part 2. The Wall of Defiance. James Harrow stormed out of the courtroom, his boots slamming against the tiled floor as the recess stretched into chaos. His mind was a furnace of rage, stoked by the image of Olivia Grant's badge flashing in his face. Chief of Police? That woman? The words looped in his head, each repetition fueling his disbelief. He'd spent 16 years carving out his place in this city, intimidating suspects, bending rules, and leaning on a network of cops and brass who valued his results over his methods. Complaints about his heavy hand or racist taunts had piled up, sure, but they'd always vanished into the system's black hole. And now she, some nobody he just shoved like a street punk, was supposed to be his boss? No chance in hell he'd let that stand. He shoved through the courthouse doors into the crisp March air, ignoring the stares of lingering reporters. His phone was already in his hand, thumb jabbing at the screen as he dialed Lieutenant Carver, a grizzled vet who'd covered for him more times than he could count. "Yeah, it's me," Harrow snapped when the line picked up. "You hear about this new chief? She's got a damn badge and thinks she runs me now. Caught me off guard in there, made me look like a fool." Carver's voice crackled through, slow and wary. "Heard she's the real deal. Harrow, first black woman chief. Word is, she's got a chip on her shoulder and files on her desk." "What did you do?" "What did I do?" Harrow's laugh was sharp, bitter. "I told some broad in the back row to quit staring. Gave her a little push to make the point. Turns out she's the big shot. Now she's talking to the judge about my conduct. She's digging." Carver. A pause hung heavy on the line. "Then you'd better bury her first," Carver said finally. "She's new. Nobody's got her back yet. Make her the problem." Harrow's lips curled into a smirk. Already on it, he hung up, his mind racing with the old playbook: discredit, deflect, destroy. Olivia Grant might have a title, but he had the streets, the loyalty of the boys in blue, and a knack for turning the tables. She wasn't taking him down. He'd make her regret ever stepping into his world. Inside a cramped office off the courtroom, Olivia sat across from the judge and the defense attorney, her posture as steady as her voice. She slid a thick folder across the table, its pages dog-eared from years of being shuffled and ignored. "Your Honor," she began, "Officer Harrow's behavior today, assaulting me in open court, is just the tip of it. This is his record: excessive force complaints, racial profiling, cases that never made it to trial. It's been buried too long." The judge flipped through the file, his frown deepening with each page. A broken arm during a 2017 arrest. A black teenager hospitalized after a stop and frisk in 2020. Reports stamped closed with no follow-up. "Why hasn't this come up before?" he asked, his tone edged with suspicion. "Because he's been protected," Olivia replied, her eyes unwavering. "By colleagues. By the union. By a system that didn't care to look. That ends now." She'd seen that system up close her whole life. Growing up in the city's roughest corner, Olivia had watched it chew up people like her brother Caleb most of all. At 16, she'd stood frozen on a cracked sidewalk as two cops dragged him from his car, slamming him against the hood for looking suspicious. He'd done nothing, but the cuffs still clicked, and the bruises lasted weeks. That night had seared itself into her. Forging a vow, she'd fight back, not with fists, but by clawing her way inside the beast to rip out its rot. The academy had tried to break her: racist jabs, sabotage, Doubts, but she'd risen. And now she held the reins. Back outside, Harrow leaned against his patrol car. Plotting his next move, he dialed another contact, a buddy in the union named Doyle. "Need a favor," he said, keeping his voice low. "Spread some noise about this Grant chick. Say she's dirty, took cash to climb the ladder. Make it loud." Doyle hesitated. "You sure, man? She's got the top job now. If she's got dirt on you, she's got nothing." Harrow cut in, his tone hard. "She's a nobody with a shiny badge. Trying to play hero. I've been here too long to let her push me around. Do it." By evening, the rumors hit the streets. Anonymous posts popped up online. New chief paid off gangs for power. Grant's a fraud, sources say. Harrow scrolled through them from a diner booth, sipping lukewarm coffee, a grin tugging at his mouth. Let her squirm under that. He wasn't some rookie she could scare off. He'd built his castle brick by brick. And no upstart was tearing it down. But Olivia didn't blink. She sat in her new office, a stark room with a view of the city's jagged skyline, reviewing Harrow's arrest logs. Torres, her assistant, knocked and stepped in. "Chief, you see the news? They're saying you're corrupt, bribes and all." "Lies," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Harrow's desperate. He's swinging wild because he knows I'm coming." She tapped a file on her desk, the Isaiah Jones case. A 2019 shooting that stank of a cover-up. Harrow had claimed the kid pulled a gun, but no weapon was ever found. "Get me everything on this," she told Torres. "Body cam, statements, anything they hid." Torres nodded and left, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts. Harrow thought he could outlast her, bully her into retreat like he'd done to so many. He didn't know her, didn't know the fire that had forged her. The years she'd spent sharpening herself for this fight. She wasn't just a chief, she was a reckoning. And he'd learned that the hard way. Outside, the city simmered. Harrow's rumors stirred the pot. But whispers of a different kind grew too, of a chief who'd faced him down. Who might finally break the cycle? He didn't see it yet, cloaked in his stubborn pride. But the walls he'd built were starting to tremble. Part 3. The cracks of fear. The precinct was a storm of unease 3 days into Olivia Grant's reign as chief. Outside, reporters swarmed like flies, their cameras trained on the building as rumors of her corruption clashed with whispers of her courtroom standoff with James Harrow. Inside, the air crackled with division. Some officers smirked at Harrow's smear campaign. Others eyed Olivia's office with cautious respect. She sat at her desk, unfazed, her focus locked on a single case, Isaiah Jones, a 17-year-old shot dead by Harrow in 2019. The official story stank. Harrow claimed self-defense, said the kid had a gun, but no weapon ever surfaced. Olivia knew a lie when she smelled one, and she was digging. Harrow, meanwhile, was holed up in a dingy diner across town, his coffee cold, his phone buzzing with updates. The rumors he'd planted were spreading. #Grant exposed trended online. And a local news blog ran a hit piece. Chief's rise tied to dirty money? He leaned back in the booth, a smug grin tugging at his lips. She might have caught him off guard in court, but he'd been playing this game too long to lose to some rookie chief. "She'll crack," he muttered to himself, scrolling through the chaos he'd unleashed. "Nobody takes me down." But Olivia was already ahead. Late that night, Torres burst into her office, breathless, holding a scratched USB drive. "Found it, Chief," he panted. Harrow's body cam from the Jones stop. It was buried in a box labeled faulty equipment. Her pulse quickened as she plugged it in. The screen flared to life, grainy footage of a dark street. Isaiah's voice trembling as he stepped from his car. "Hands up, I ain't got nothing, sir, I swear." A flash, a gunshot, and he crumpled. Then the truth. Harrow, calm as ice, pulled a pistol from his belt and dropped it beside the body. Suspect drew a weapon. He radioed, his tone flat, practiced. The video cut out. Torres stared, pale. He planted it. "That's murder." Olivia's jaw tightened. "And we've got him." She copied the file to a personal drive, her instincts screaming not to trust the system's servers. Harrow had friends, too many, and she wasn't taking chances. Harrow wasn't blind, though. He'd caught wind she was sniffing around old cases. and it lit a fire under him. From his car, parked in an alley, he called Reese, a hacker he'd used for dirty jobs. "Wipe something for me," he growled. "Bodycam, 19. Jones case. It's in the system, kill it." Reese's voice wavered. "That's risky, Harrow. If they trace, triple your pay." Harrow cut in, his patience thin. "Do it now." By dawn, the precinct's digital archive glitched, Harrow's footage erased, leaving only a string of error codes. When Olivia checked that morning, her stomach sank. "He's covering tracks," she said, slamming her laptop shut. But then she pulled out her backup drive, a faint smile breaking through. Too late, Harrow. She moved fast. By noon, she stood on the precinct steps, the USB raised like a torch. "This is proof," she declared to a sea of microphones, "that Officer James Harrow planted evidence and murdered Isaiah Jones. It's not just him, it's a system that let him run free." That stops today. The city erupted. Harrow watched from a bar, the TV blaring her voice, "Murdered Isaiah Jones." His whiskey glass shook in his hand, slipping to shatter on the floor. "No way," he hissed, dialing Reese. "You said it was gone." "They had a copy." Reese stammered. "I'm done, man. You're toxic." Harrow's chest tightened, his breaths short. The bar's patrons stared, whispers turning to pointed glares. He stumbled outside, the cold biting his face. His phone lit up, texts from Carver. "Doyle, his lawyer. You're suspended. Can't help. They've got video." The words blurred as panic clawed at him. His allies were bailing, the system he'd gamed for years spitting him out. For the first time, he felt it, fear, sharp and unfamiliar, sinking into his bones. But he shoved it down, clinging to defiance. "She won't win," he snarled, starting his car. "I'll burn her first." Olivia read his desperation in the threats buzzing her phone. "You're dead, Grant," she smirked, locking the screen. "He's running scared," she told Torres. "Get me a warrant. I know where he's hiding his dirt." Harrow's castle was crumbling, and the cracks were widening. He didn't see justice yet, just a fight he refused to lose. But the law was closing in, and fear was waiting. Part 4. The Weight of Justice. The city was a manhunt by nightfall. Helicopters thrummed overhead, their beams slicing through the dark as news screamed. Fugitive cop flees after murder evidence surfaces. Harrow had vanished, ditching his car for a stolen pickup, his hands slick with sweat on the wheel. His shoulder throbbed from a bar fight he'd started to vent his rage. His uniform swapped for a torn jacket. The precinct had suspended him. His union cut ties, and the footage of Isaiah's death played on every screen. Fear gnawed at him now, a constant hum beneath his defiance. But he wouldn't run, not yet. He'd make Olivia pay. Olivia, meanwhile, stood outside a storage unit on the city's outskirts. Warrant in hand, she'd guessed Harrow kept a stash, insurance against the system he'd milked. Her team cut the lock, revealing boxes of files and USBs labeled with names, victims of his reign. She plugged in Isaiah Jones, 2019, watching the murder replay, then sifted through more. Beatings, planted drugs, buried cases. "He's a monster," Torres whispered. "And he's finished," Olivia said, bagging the evidence. She knew he'd come for her. His pride wouldn't let him fade quietly. Harrow waited at the docks, a rotting warehouse his last stand. His phone rang her number, his voice a rasp. "Found me yet, Grant? This ain't over. I know where you are," she replied, calm. "It ends tonight." He laughed, hollow. "You'll see. I'm the system. You can't kill me. You're a ghost of it," she said, "and I'm the exorcist." The line died, and she drove to the docks alone, gun ready. Inside the warehouse, shadows danced as she stepped in. "Harrow," she called, her voice steady. "Face it, you're done." He lunged from the dark, gun raised, eyes wild. "You took everything," he roared, his hand shaking. Fear had overtaken him now, his bravado a thin mask. "I'll bury you." Olivia sidestepped, her shot ringing out. His arm bled. His gun fell. He crumpled, gasping, as sirens wailed closer. "No," he whimpered, the fight draining as officers cuffed him. His eyes met hers, terror naked in them. Justice had won. Weeks later, the courtroom was packed, The prosecution showed the footage. The stash. The truth. Harrow sat, head bowed, fear etched in his slump as the guilty verdict hit, 25 years. No parole. The room cheered. A weightlifting. Outside, Olivia stood with Isaiah's family. "Thank you," his mother said, tears falling. "It's just the start," Olivia replied. She launched a task force to root out corruption. Her gaze on a young boy watching her, a new hope kindled. Harrow's fall sparked reform, and as she walked away, a text buzzed. "More to come." She nodded. The fight went on, but justice had begun.